right, thank you everyone. First of all, thank you Mark and Roger, and Larry for putting this together. And thank you all of you for joining us today. So I'll be talking a little bit about finding and mapping historical artifacts associated with the Gullah Geechee rice cultivation off of Eagles Island. I do have a few quotes I teach environmental sciences at UNCW. I'm an associate professor there. They always tell you not to read directly from slides, but I'm going to do that because I have tenure now, so I'm allowed to do that. So anyway, this is really a combination of work between Mark and myself. Mark was really instrumental in a lot of this work, so massive thanks to him. So again, this is a combination between myself and obviously Dr. Ramsing. We're looking at on every freshwater river and estuary along the coast of the Rice Kingdom, above the influence of salt water and upriver to the point where at least a 3-foot difference in low and high tide occur, slaves converted freshwater tidal swamps and marshes to rice fields. I want to point out the image on the top left. So we're looking at kind of that West African region. We have everywhere from kind of Senegal on the west coast of Central Africa, reaching all the way to approximately Nigeria in that area. So that was really where a lot of the rice cultivation of those experts very much came from. While the rice was the cash crop of the coastal southeast, this is a quote from Sean Palmer, who's the director of the UNCW's Upper African American Cultural Center. Amazing quote here. While the rice was the cash crop of the coastal southeast, along with Sea Island cotton and indigo, Gullah Geechee ancestors provided both the brain trust and physical labor needed to change the landscapes into spaces that created commercial yields of the crop. The children of West Africa, who came to be known as Gullah Geechee, were agricultural engineers who, like the rice, were harvested for their vast knowledge. I get goosebumps every time I read that. So just to point out some of the locations we're looking at, really where the experts came from are really this part of kind of central West Africa. Enslaved people died at much higher rates in the rice region than anywhere else in the South. Enslaved workers were brutalized, undernourished, and overworked, and forced to work in standing water and mud under the brutally hot sun. Establishing rice plantations involved draining snake and mosquito-infested tidal swamps and marshes, building dikes by piling up mud dug from river bottoms, and installing giant gates to let fresh water flood the fields and keep out incoming tides. Work so treacherous that only people threatened by the whip would do it. So let's move forward about 200 years from the kind of 1800s. So let's move to the present. It all started again with Mark, archaeologist, keen eye for archaeology, and he would go out with his small vessels. Here he is on a 22-foot rowing shell. He's part of the rowing club near Belleville. Would spend many years traversing up and down those canals. And just from his keen eye, he started noticing a lot of these structures. You can see this one on the top right, again some on the bottom right also. He started realizing that these were man-made structures. And being an archaeologist that he is, he started doing the research and realized that a lot of these features were associated with irrigation, rice irrigation, again, from a couple of hundred years ago. So he was able to find different kinds of bulkheads, floodgates, landings, and repairs. So, by coincidence, Mark is also my neighbor. So, it's meant to be, isn't it? It's just meant to be. Excuse me. So, I'm a coastal geologist. Mark's a maritime archaeologist. And he asked me, he said, Osku, do you have any kind of equipment where we could actually measure things underwater to see almost like photographic imagery on things underwater? Because I can see them at low tide, but when the tide, even at low tide, I can't see directly what's underwater. So I've got this small, it's called a side scan sonar. It's basically, I'll show images of it in a second. It just sends high frequency pulses. It kind of bounces off the bottom, returns the signal. And from the return signal, we're able to imagine you're almost looking straight down, almost taking photographic images of something, right? So here we can see images. Here's a shipwreck. This is some of the Civil War blockade runners. This is some of the work I've been doing with my students. You can see fine featureless sand, and then you can see these beautiful sand waves also from some of these images. So you almost get a three-dimensional picture, but you can also determine what kind of sediment type there is on the bottom based on this. So it's acoustic reflectivity. We can see differences in seabed texture, substrate types, and then we can use it to find things like pipelines or anchors, shipwrecks, used very much in industry, but also in science. So that's kind of my background. I have this customized system. So I said, yes, Mark, I've got what we need. Here's an example from the field. So this is the sonar transducer itself. So it's about maybe 1 foot long. It's a customized system for shallow water applications. So that was one of the ideas here, where we don't need to tow these huge instruments. We don't need big vessels. We can basically mount it on a small skiff with a little pole mount. So we have a GPS system that gives us our location. And then we have a small laptop, GPS, everything's connected. I was sitting in the bow, kind of running the instrumentation. This sits in the water, so we just basically fold the pole down, put it underwater, and we basically get going. We can set this up in about 10 minutes. So just really perfect for this kind of work. Here's our field laptop. You can see Mark's really struggling with our research, those horrible days and just not fun at all. And what are we doing out here, right? So he was the captain, always a big smile on his face. Some days we'd go out and it was just incredible. Just fantastic conditions. Sometimes not so much. We'd run into things like logs, and we had to be very careful. Obviously, it's hard to get to some of these places, low tide, so we had to be particularly careful. But just so much fun, just the two of us out there, maybe once a month, once every couple of months. So just a brief history of rice. Driven by worldwide consumption, rice became an important cash crop in the Americas, originating in the late 17th century in colonial South Carolina and over time spreading south throughout Georgia, north into southern North Carolina. Production increased until it reached its peak between the 1850s and 1860s and declined after the Civil War. The Lower Cape Fear reported 200,000 bushels of rice in 1842 and about 500,000 in 1857. This is according to the Morning Star of 1872, where we can still find records and access a lot of those old periodicals. This is compared, so we're talking about maybe 500,000 bushels compared with about 3.5 million from South Carolina. So South Carolina was very much kind of the top, the key area. In many areas, production completely collapsed. Loss of slave labor reduced profitability. In Wilmington, rice cultivation recovered in the 1870s, due in part to mechanization and, more importantly, the availability of a labor pool provided from nearby fertilizer factories and convicts housed in prison camps, both groups of whom were mostly African Americans. And this is according to Mayor Yulee Willis, who I believe is in the audience, and Minford's, I believe that was a thesis from 2012. And you can see some of these maps, the extension of how far. We have some of the plantations that Roger also showed earlier. So rice cultivation collapsed after the Civil War due to three interacting factors. Without free labor, we don't have the enslaved person's labor. The enterprise was no longer profitable. A series of large storms damaged water control devices. We had hurricanes back 200 years ago. We've had hurricanes for centuries. And the planters did not have the capital nor the labor to recover from this series of devastating events. While rice farming in the Mississippi Delta was able to mechanize, planters along the Atlantic coast, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina, were unable to transition from human labor to machinery due in large part to the soft alluvial soils. So very muddy and soft areas. So if we look at this today, we have some imageries here. Mark and I would go through some of these very narrow canals. The hand-dug canals are often quite narrow, shallow, and full of obstructions. Again, we have lots of logs and trees and lots of marsh, swamp. It's been overtaken by native freshwater and saltwater species. Roger talked about the deepening of the harbor. We have freshwater slowly coming up. We have higher tides. And we can see some of this erosion. This is work done by Kopetsky. These areas in red show erosion. They ran some, I believe it was aerial imagery, and then they compared it with the past. So erosion is currently taking place too. So these things are constantly changing, so it's important to kind of keep in touch with this currently. Here are some examples. You can see these beautiful straight lines that were created by the slaves. Straight, this is how they'd allow the water to come into these areas and then flow out. And then you can see what some of this ditch erosion looks like. And a lot of this work is from Kapetsky. So ongoing changes. Here's an example. This is from the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology. This is one of these rice gates. This is near Sutton Lake. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Sutton Lake. So this is an image from 1986, in fairly good shape. And then this is from 2019. Lots of impacts from that, so it's almost hardly recognizable anymore after only about 40 years. So constant change, important to document these areas. Here we have, we used these single-chambered, these rice trunks. This is how the water would be allowed to flow in from, say, from the river into the marshy areas. We'd have these gates. And then I'm just going to end it up with tenki, and that is thank you in the Gullah language. Thank you.